Hello, everyone, and we are glad to welcome you on this live. This is our first interview this week, and this time we're speaking to Monique Morrow. She's the president and co-founder of the Humanized Internet, and we're going to talk about uh, the values of the Humanized Internet that will be present on our Blockchain Leadership Summit, November 23rd, 24th in Basel. Hello, Monique.
Hello, Dennis. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's nice to meet you. How are you doing after the weekend?
Good, good. It's been quite a weekend. Everything is active here, and I'm based in Zurich, so it's already full.
Yeah, the stuff has been incredibly hectic, like basically everywhere. Especially because this autumn we are still expecting some more activities with the blockchain, and I hope, unlike the previous autumns, it will be a bit more technological, a bit more human driven, a bit more oriented on the greater than just revenues focuses. So would you please, so that we are all on the same page, introduce us to what the Humanized Internet actually is?
Okay, be glad to. Well, first and foremost, once again, it's a pleasure to be here with you and everyone. The Humanized Internet is the Swiss-based nonprofit, and it's really based around the notion of you maintaining your own digital identity sets, and also looking at those people or individuals who don't have it. So it's two areas that we're quite focused on. I have a co-founder who is based in Toronto and a colleague who's actually based in Berlin. And so it's a very global problem about how do you deal, with all of the technologies that we're looking at, and especially if we use something foundational as the internet, what does that humanization mean? And what we find is a pattern that identity sets are very, very important to us. Whether you're talking about the Internet of Things, that's an addressable entity. If you're talking about somebody who is recognized by a state or not recognized as a state, that's also an entity. We all have identities. You have a professional identity, Dennis. You have a private identity. You have a cultural identity. But also what's associated and very fundamental to it is whether or not, that's recognized and by which entities. And the reason why we talk about, so on two formats, digital, that which you own, in a digital format, is because of the following, and this is where blockchain can play a very, very important role about determining provenance of X and Y. The problem is that if you are not recognized, if you don't have a hard copy piece of document that is some state, some organization says it's okay, then what happens is that you're subjected to all kinds of problems. You don't exist in the system. You may be subjected to human trafficking. You may be subjected to all kinds of problems. And if we think about statelessness, there are 10 million people. If you think about refugees, that's it's billions, at least a billion. And what happens is that one day something happens because of war or because of natural catastrophe where you have to pick up and go, right? And what do you take with you? What is going to be recognized by which authorities? So that's one set, but can it be in a digital format is another set, is another issue. The other issue is about who controls you, and who controls those identity sets. And I think that's a bigger macro problem that we need to look at. And so one aspect of this is can you imagine, and here's the big problem, big opportunity, that you can have something in its digital format that's like a Trezor, like a bank, like a digital bank, that you may have keys to, your family members may have keys to, some kind of cryptographic keys, and where you and only you will have those digital keys. And the whole notion is that it could be recognized. You choose to share it with with whomever that you want to share it with, whatever quote unquote authorities that they are. The analogy I like to give is I may keep my important papers in a vault, a bank vault or whatever, but if it disappears, what happens? What happens if the institution no longer exists? can we imagine a greater problem to solve for, which is a digital safe box that is persistent to you, that is not centralized, and only you have those keys, and it follows you, right? I mean, this is a bigger problem. It's not about storage in some central cloud. It's a really harder problem to solve, which I think is going to be very interesting from a research perspective, but also interesting from a development perspective. And where you can have a digital apostille. A digital apostille, what I mean by an apostille, some authority near real time that has nonsense of truth that actually affirms who you are. And I think this is the greater opportunity that we need to solve for. That's the humanized internet in a nutshell. But the other component of this problem is around your digital footprint. You know, we all use social media. We're using social media now. And if we take the thesis of the humanized internet a step forward, and I think the thing of it is that we're finding is that what your footprint looks like is being used maybe appropriately or inappropriately by other organizations. And you have to think about what quote unquote control means, whether or not you should be the center of that universe, whether or not you should be paid to give your data away or whatever. And I think that's something that we need to think about very, very seriously. I just had a conversation this morning, which really breaks the scenario. People, you know, people are used to that central databases being hacked, seeming gamified. And one person said, yeah, I'm used to it. And I'm thinking, but should that always be the case? Should that be today's norm, right? And I think that the answer is not necessarily. I think if we start to think about how we have our digital safe box that is persistent to us and follows us, and B, that we look at how our data is being used. And if I want to share my data for smart medicine, you know, at least I know how it's being used. I would know, and I would give permission to do that. I think it's going to be. I think this is going to be something that we are on the cusp of a tectonic shift in the way of our thinking. That we have if we have an assumption of a trust deficit, that we can actually look at how we use these technologies to build that trust. We are in the center of that universe. If that makes sense.
Well, it does. At the same time, I still had this question, you know, whirling in my mind. You are you tell us about storing your digital identity in a form, for instance, of Trezor, which is still kind of a device. At the same time, if we try to avoid that, if we try to avoid any necessity for any paper copied storage or any device copied storage, then who shall we authorize to be the decentralized online digital storage? Shall that be a state authority or shall that be a private organization? How do we actually establish the trust to that?
Oh, well, no, what I'm talking about is even further in the thinking. Right? I'm not talking about a state authority, and I'm not talking about some other organization. I'm talking about something yet to be invented. And so it's something that is persistent to you. And the thing of it is that it's not held. The storage problem is a big problem to solve for, Dennis. And so because the assumption is I'm going to designate some authority, something centralized to manage it. This is already, you can do that today, right? But I'm looking at something that is persistent to you, that it's following you wherever you are going, whether it's in the device format or whatever that looks like. And only you will share it to whatever authorities you wish to share it to. It's a different form of thinking. Now, I've spoken to some research universities here in Zurich, in Switzerland, and some of them are along the lines of doing just that, right? To think about how you look at that. Even Tim Berners-Lee, who created the World Wide Web, is looking at something along those lines, just the way the web is where you are managing your own sort of data format. So what we're thinking about is not too far off from the realities of today. There are groups, whether they're research organizations or whether there's some people who are visionaries like Tim Berners-Lee, thinking about this problem now. I mean, so this becomes completely different from hey, I'm going to designate some authority, a central database to manage it.
So you're looking for a completely new renovating solution that will actually truly decentralize, and not just make a decentralized copy of the data that we store, but will actually introduce a truly decentralized concept of both storing and keeping your data, your digital identity.
Correct. And I think we're on the cusp of that happening. And blockchain is one example of where we're going, but certainly there's how we're using the web. There's certainly how we're using some format of looking at keys. I mean, these are going to be, there's opportunities here to go for, not only from a research and development, but also from a business perspective. I think there's, business, from a consumer perspective, from an individual perspective, that we need to think about more. And I'm very excited to be candid with you, Dennis. I'm very excited about what is possible. And so some people think, oh my God, that's so ethereal what you're thinking, but it's not true. It's very, very possible. And so, I'm not talking about world citizenship here. I'm basically talking about some forms of identity sets that you're responsible for, that you only choose to share what you want to share. I think this is flipping the conversation in a way that it's not offensive to governments, and it's not offensive to organizations, but where you are in the center of the universe and not the sun, right? As Copernicus once said, asserted. Now you as an individual become the center.
Mm-hmm. Well, speaking about security and privacy, well, first of all, there is the question of overall security. How do we actually make sure that no non-authorized, let's say, third party obtains an access to the digital identity and digital data stored? And the second is probably something that concerns very many people. Now, we have all seen the Black Mirror. We have all read about what's going on now in China, where they invent the actual Black Mirror there. And the thing is that if we actually, you're right, if we delegate any third party with the right to access and to store all of our digital identity data, we are at risk of ending up with another Black Mirror story there. Well,
my argument is that we're not going to designate any third party to store your data. This is a different way of thinking. Right, so if you have, how many people are there in the world, right?
About 7 billion, yeah.
Okay, so think about it. Where the thing to think about is, now you reverse the hacking mentality to somebody hacking 7.2 billion people, right? That's the thinking. So you'd have to go after individuals. You'd have to go after, and rather than saying, okay, the coalesced sum of all of this data is something I want to have, this will be a different way of thinking. And it's yet to be, I think it's yet to be developed and fully, it's yet to be invented. That's the really big opportunity. Because for the very reasons that we all sit here and cite, anything that is centralized is already a weakened situation for the very reasons. The cryptography is being challenged ever more. We have to look at being ahead of the curve from a security perspective. So the whole idea is now thinking about something called individual trésors or safe boxes, and it's a harder problem. I'm not saying that's an easy problem, but it's a harder problem. Yet turning it around, saying it's an opportunity at the same time.
Well, besides, any centralized system is potentially biased to misuse of the rights that they have been delegated with, depending on the political or state influence. So that's another danger that has to be somehow implemented. Its solution has to be implemented into the overall concept. Now, speaking about the actual values, like, let's say, if we now think about the humanized internet as a concept, then let's say in a year we will actually get it, or like in a month or in some period of time, we will get it as a working solutions, as a set of working solutions. What benefits and values will we obtain, like in the adoption, in the process of adoption, in the process of development?
Well, I think at a macro level, one of the things that we have to kind of look at is how do we embed ethics in what we do? Does ethics carry a gold standard? And by which groups do we, ethics is a very harder problem. And of course, if you're a company, or if you're an organization, you're going to say, yes, of course we're ethical. But on the same token, it's like, what does it mean from consumer perspective? What does it mean from a business perspective? So for me, the embedded ethics is going to be important. I think if we think about the world in the next, which is very difficult to predict, but I think if we think about, if we put the patterns together, and I think we're all people who can understand patterns heretofore, certainly ethics carry some do carry value. It doesn't take much to taint your brand, where ethics can, it brings down an organization or brings down a company. So the other point here is that, can we recognize cognitive bias, respond to recognize it, because we are all infected by it. So, it's by being responsible, being technologically responsible, because there's a fine polarity between that which is very really exciting to use, and that which can be used for abuse situations. The humanized internet is more than just a concept. The humanized internet is, first and foremost, as I stated before, this nonprofit. We are writing a book about it, so that I think there's a book to be published in the first quarter of next year. So that will bring together what we're talking about in the industry about the humanized internet and the problems and opportunities we want to solve for. And I think the thing that we have to think about is these examples that I stated, this persistent identity, these persistent trésors that are yet to be created, though research is underway to do so. How do we keep, to your earlier point, how do we make sure that there is enough wherefore to have security and privacy and constantly in place? This is always a situation, because I may not like you and I may want to do something with whatever your data is. Miscreant characters exist no matter what, and that's just the world we live in. It's just the world we've been living in, and it's part of human nature. But on the other hand, it's about about asking the question whether or not the institutions we know and value so far are valid, or whether we need a new way of thinking in the 21st century. And my thesis is to the latter, that we need a new way of thinking.
Oh, we always do. Thanks for that explanation. And then speaking about the micro level, like let's say I, as an average person, I do get that, well, whatever it is, the treasure storage, the hard paper copy, or I just keep the private keys in my mind, whatever it is. But how will my everyday life be different in this case? Like, what will be the benefits I get? Like, do I save time? Do I feel secure about my banking information? What's going to be the change for me?
I think the change. So there's several things about the change. The change for you is that you are going to be able to determine who is going to access your data, whether it's a doctor you like or a doctor. You were talking about dentists earlier, and that you will be absolutely in the center of that. You can say, I want this person to access my data. I don't want this person to access my data. And by the way, what I'm talking about is already being done in Estonia. So it's not like it's not impossible. It's at a state level it's being done, right? So, and where citizens are quite involved in their determination of who they want to have, for people to have access to whatever it is their data is. So that empowers you. It's more of a psychological thing than anything else, that you are empowered, that you can determine which bank or whatever entity that you want to, financial entity you want to do business with, or look at how you trade assets and so on and so forth. You are more involved in your own daily life. The other thing I want to say if we're talking about blockchain, because we talked about sort of the storage of the digital identity, is that the low-hanging fruit here is about how do you deal with credentialing? How do you deal with certification and blockchain, which is something that is very, very, we're engaged in today, where, for example, if I get a certificate or a diploma from X and X university, can I actually have keys exchange? Can I actually have a timestamped certificate put on the blockchain that I can look forever more. MIT has done it with a group of its students. University of Nicosia is doing it. So where you create sort of this network effect of having your credentials at least posted and and you can use it with block explorers to actually look at your credentials. So that's one example where I think low-hanging fruit is. Now the question is whether or not it would be recognized by other authorities if I move from country to country. And I think that is yet to be determined, especially if we look at the legal form of settlement. I'm coming to a country, I have all of this proof that I've done something, would it be accepted? Well, the problem we have today, because I want to look at the really low-hanging fruit example, is that when you're resettled as a refugee, you have all of the proof that you've done something. Well, it takes maybe 20, 30,000 euros or maybe even more to recertify in a certain skill set. And so what happens is people drain on the social system and they do want to work. So if we can think about solving for problems like that in a very scalable way, we could. We have the technology to do that today. It's the will of countries to be able to accept it.
Mm-hmm. So pretty much that means that, well, in some future, probably not that distant, but anyway, in some future, for instance, I as a regular person will be able to travel, basically keeping the backup of all the data about myself, and I will be able to let only the authorized, I will let some entities or people get an access to that data, so that is possible for me to get to a job interview easier, to get to college easier, and I will not actually have to recollect all the data from many different authorities in different countries or states. I will just be able to keep like a backpack of all of that.
It would be your digital safe box. That's correct. And let me give you an example one last example, if I may, Dennis, because you get it. You get it. One last example is when we were founding the nonprofit here in Switzerland, right, in Zurich. My co-founder is based in Toronto. And so what had to happen is that the lawyers had to DHL the papers to be signed by him in Toronto and to have an apostille, right, this official stamp from the Swiss consulate. Well, there's no consulate in Toronto. It had to be DHL to Montreal, back to Toronto, back to me, or back to my lawyer. DHL, DHL, DHL. Well, think about that. Is there a better way to actually get an apostille seal? A notary? I think there is. I think we have that, what could be accepted as a digital notary. That's just a simple example. That's a very, very simple example where you didn't have to have these hard papers, like this, with official stamps on it. And we have to think in a different world about what it can be accepted, from a digital perspective, and that which it could be founding a company as an example. Let alone you being responsible for your data, you having your own persistent storage and a tracer at a digital format. And I think that's something that we have to think about in now and in the future.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you very much for the introduction to the concept and the explanation of the values. I hope we actually will listen to more, and we will I'm looking forward to your participation in the Blockchain Leadership Summit, where I hope you will throw more light on the overall concept. I will probably also probably like you to kind of deliver the main message of the humanized internet to our audiences now. So basically, if now we speak about the humanized internet, what is the main value for people? Why shall they join it? Why shall they support it? Why shall they, attend our summit to listen to you, to see your presentation and stuff?
It's simple. It's really bringing humanization back to you. It's really bringing and all of this that we're talking about, algorithmic decision making and everything else. It's really putting you as a human being in the center of that universe. That's the simple message. And you may think that you are, but my thesis is that we have gone astray. So that's the opportunity.
Thank you. Well, it's been a pleasure talking to you, and I hope to see you next month on the summit. It was really interesting to listen about the humanized internet. I hope it actually works out fine, and we actually get the real kind of human universal values back to us in the digital era.
Great, thank you, Dennis. Looking forward to meeting you also and seeing you also in Basel.
Thank you. Thank you everyone who's been watching us. I hope you are staying tuned to us. We will have more live interviews this week, and I welcome all of you to take part in our summit, to be our guest in Basel, November 23rd, 24th. Thank you. Have a good one.